Please note that this meeting is being electronically recorded. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move on to our scheduled agenda tonight, as I made the committee aware an hour or so ago, and as I know I'm sure members of the public are aware, there are media reports of an incident at Hill Roberts Elementary School regarding student safety, and I've asked the superintendent to offer a brief statement with regard to that. Mr. Sheehan?
Currently, we are conducting an investigation. We will continue that investigation. We have assembled numerous people and agencies for tomorrow's meeting so we can get all of the accurate information, which I don't think that the media currently has passed on through our agencies. However, we're going to treat this in the most serious manner. It did involve a note that people would view as a hit list with a few students' names that are on it. And we're going to treat this very serious and take care of matters, but to ensure that all the students in all of our schools are safe and continue to be safe. I'm very happy that the person, a substitute teacher, actually found this particular note and passed on to the appropriate people. So we're going to deal with this with due diligence, and we're going to do right by everyone involved.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Obviously, it goes without saying that the safety and security of the Attleboro Schools community is the first priority, both of the school administration and the school committee. And as Mr. Sheehan said, there will be a thorough response to the reports of this incident. And as information becomes more accurate to the degree that it can be communicated, it will be. So thank you again, Mr. Sheehan, for your response to that. The next on the agenda is open forum, and by policy, I am obligated to read the following statement. This is a time when members of the public may address the school committee. Open forum is not a time for committee members to engage in dialogue with members of the public. Guidelines for open forum are available to you. Please know that we are interested in what you have to say, but we cannot respond without background information on your issues. So is there anyone who would like to address the committee as part of the open forum? Okay, and that closes open forum, and we move on to our Spotlight Events feature, where we share information that the community should know about, and with that, we turn it over to our student representative, Mr. Lancaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, with February vacation sort of looming in the near future, the schedule is a little thin and for the upcoming weeks. But I chose to spotlight the Winter Dance for Special Education. On February 20th, the Attleboro Cultural Council, the Attleboro Rotary Club, and the Attleboro Special Education Parent Advisory Council will be sponsoring a winter dance at Congregation Agudas Achim on 901 North Main Street in Attleboro. This event is open to all students receiving special education services in Attleboro and their families. But please note that all children must be accompanied by an adult. To RSVP or sign up as a volunteer, because volunteers are much needed to set up, clean up, and also to chaperone, please call ASEPAC at 508-222-0012, extension 1444, or via email excuse me, at asepac@ymail.com. We look forward to seeing everyone break out their dancing shoes and to have some fun.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. And I know this is an event that ASPEC has put on at least for the last
last year was the first
at least
year.
the last year.
It was a good time.
But it's I know something that has drawn a lot of support for the community, and we're thankful to Mr. Lancaster for highlighting it. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
I have one. I could never imagine myself teaching you something, because I've met you a number of times and I know how smart you are. But for your community, it's pronounced Agudas Achim.
Excuse me. Agudas Achim. No.
Now you know.
Thank you.
We won't dock his pay for that, though. That's
Appreciate that.
a mistake. Okay, thank you, Mr. Lancaster. We're going to move on now to our consent agenda, and in the effort to keep this meeting moving along, we only have one item, and that is a motion to approve the field study proposal for 48 AHS students to travel to New York City on February 28th, and this is a student-funded field trip.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. I did note this, I believe, to the committee in the communication, but this was a field trip that was rescheduled. It was supposed to be later in the year. The administration asked us to approve it despite the short timetable. It's one that the students at the high school have participated in for many years, and it has a lot of educational value. So all in favor?
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Abstentions.
Okay, I
There.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Oh, in that case, you may not have to abstain, but still probably safer. Okay, so that field trip is approved, and we look forward to hearing about their time in New York City. Moving on to new business. The first presentation under new business tonight is information about the Opportunities Fair, which is a program that I believe came into existence this year and I know has been spearheaded, I imagine, by a number of staff members, but I know our Director of Special Education, Ms. McCarthy, and our guidance coordinator at the high school, Ms. Little. And joining them tonight are Ms. LaChance and Mr. Cerrone, who are both at the high school as well, correct? Correct. And so perhaps, Ms. McCarthy, you could, is it Dr. McCarthy now? I apologize for that. Dr. McCarthy will share with us information about the Opportunities Fair.
It's actually the second year of the Opportunities Fair, and so this year was building off of last year's and the feedback we got from last year's fair. The concept this year was to create it to be an even more inclusive Opportunities Fair than it was last year. It targeted students that were just identified as at risk. This year we tried to target kids that also had special needs and unique learning styles. So this great team who had been working last year worked with me in the special ed department at the high school and really created an excellent event that reached out to the community and brought people from the military, employers from the community into Attleboro to meet our high school seniors who don't yet have plans for after high school, and that was really the target audience that we were going for. They did workshops leading up to the event so that students had resumes in order to bring to the event to share with employers who were actually doing interviews, not mock interviews, real interviews, and could potentially be hiring the students. And there were career trainings, colleges. There was a vast majority, and it was all built upon the students' needs and their interests. And I'll let the team speak to it. We have Julie Little, the head guidance counselor here at the high school, and our school to career partnership, Andy Cerrone and Christine LaChance. So they've created a presentation for you.
To start off, some of you may not be familiar, but the Attleboro School to Career Partnership has been in existence for about 13 years now, and we have supported Attleboro High School and as well as North Attleboro, Norton, and Foxborough over those years. And working with the individuals here at each of the schools, we identify programs that they would like to see going forward. And last year, we serviced 86 students with 16 employers came in and did interviews, but that was targeted more so to the career and tech ed area of the Attleboro High School. And as she mentioned, this year we reached 156 students with this program, and 26 presenters. There was 4 from the military, 6 support services, 10 employers, and 6 accredited colleges or training institutions. And it really was a true collaboration. What really makes this work, the partnership can go ahead and try to bring these resources to the schools to meet the needs of all students, and that's really important to us. But if we don't have the collaboration internally to identify those students and to make this happen, it won't. And this year was a true success. Working with guidance to identify the students, working with special ed to ensure that the services, the programs that we brought in as part of the Opportunities Fair really helped represent and really transition all students. There was something for everybody who came to the fair. It was our goal. And so that's basically it.
Okay. So we wanted to make sure that we had a list of students that was representative of everyone who would want to attend a fair such as this. And so we all got together, Marissa, Andy, Christine, and I, and decided that we would target the fair to seniors. So we definitely started there. And then we said, okay, we want to make sure that we're targeting students that maybe need a little bit more assistance or perhaps don't have a post-secondary plan yet. And so we did I think it was back in December, we did a student survey and advisory, and based on those results, those students were added to the list. What we did was we took a look at the list after that, and we emailed senior parents and also seniors through Aspen, and we said, would you like to be added to this list? This is what's going on. So we wanted to make it all inclusive, but we really did want to target the students that didn't have plans for this particular fair. The next thing that we wanted to do is advertise the event. And Mr. Rooney was very helpful. He invited the Sun Chronicle here. We had the local cable channel that day, so that was very, very helpful. All of our staff members from our various different departments were alerted to the event, so there was a lot of communication going out about the event. And of course, it was in our daily notices. So we wanted to make sure that we got the word out to everyone and that we were, again, all inclusive. One of the very exciting things was feedback that we got. And I think it was really nice. The group that we had, the 26 presenters that we had, were all a little bit different. And one of the examples that I'd like to share was from Electric Boat. Electric Boat was so impressed with our CTE department. They requested to tour the welding department because they couldn't believe the kinds of facilities that we had. Electric Boat has, the gentleman said, a number of openings, and he wanted to tour the facility, which he did. Again, he was very impressed, and he said, these are the kinds of kids that I would want to employ. So we were very, very pleased to hear that. Our Rob Geddes from BCC, always very, very helpful. One of the things that he said, he saw a lot of familiar faces because he's been here a number of times for on-site admissions, so that was really nice. There's that for familiarity. Paul Mitchell School, we invited them. They had a very successful visit in the fall, and they brought 3 representatives with them. They had very, very positive things to say. We invited ARC, and although during that event, you never saw a huge line around them. I went to talk to them, and they had a lot of private conversations going on. They're a wonderful support system for kids, and so I was very, very impressed with some of the services. So they were really happy to be invited. And the last one, Massasoit Community College, they were so impressed with the fair that they asked to come back for on-site admissions. So they have not done that before, so we thought that was very exciting.
So, we did talk to some of the students after we sent out some of the requests for feedback. Students are tough to get feedback from because they're very subjective, and they don't want to do anything that they don't have to do sometimes. So
Goes for adults sometimes.
yeah, sometimes. So we asked the students to give us something at least. Some kids felt it wasn't applicable to them because we did have some instances where students, they didn't put anything on, they didn't take the thing we'd sent out seriously when we had asked them what their postgraduate plans were. So they said, nothing, whatever. They didn't even put anything. So we assumed, oh, you don't have a plan. They came down, actually, I'm going to a 4-year school. I have a 5-year plan. And then why am I here? And so some kids didn't find it very useful. A lot of our kids did, though. We targeted kids especially that said they were military bound, but they never taken the ASVAB. So we could, provide those resources there. These are the people you need to talk to in order to do what you want to do. So we were able to pull in some kids that didn't know what the resources were that they needed. And then they said, oh, this is exactly what I need. I just didn't even know that. So we were able to actually get a lot of kids in there that were able to find services that were very useful. A lot of the employers that we had, even though we'd shrunk in the amount of employers that came, about half of them were repeat employers, which is very impressive in my opinion because of the fact that meant they happened to be hiring then and they're happen to be hiring now, and they said, you know what, that kid worked out that I did meet, or I met some kids and I just never followed up with them, but I really want to try it again. So the fact that we did have that much turnover is, in my mind, a good thing because you can't expect someone to be hiring at any given moment when you reach out to them. So even though we didn't have that full 100% return rate, I think it was still a good sign. As for some of the other stories that we had for some kids, we did have a few kids go on interviews outside of the event. So the employer reached out to them, called them up, wanted them to come in for an interview. What we did was send out a survey to a lot of the employers to say, please let us know if you do contact some of our students. And, you know, they own businesses, they're running businesses that sometimes don't have time to get back to us. So even though we only had a few recorded examples of employers hiring students last year, what we did find was that we would talk to kids and they'd say, oh, I was working for that company that I met last year. And, you know, surprise to me, which is a great thing because that means what we're doing is working, even if we don't see it immediately. So we did have a few kids this year go for interviews. I know one that did actually get hired at a company. He's very excited to start working there. And, you know, he's a senior, so in 4 months, that's going to be his full-time job. Now he's got an actual plan working for a company where he's using his skills that he built in CTE to actually make money and not be trapped in a dead-end, you know, minimum wage job. It's someplace where you can grow and learn new skills without having to go into a tech or a trade school. So it's a really great opportunity. As for our next year's goals, something we had talked about was trying to build this into something that we can incorporate into our school, not just for kids that are graduating, but for kids that are juniors and seniors, actually. Since we did do it during the second trimester, something we want to do is incorporate it into the experiential learning program that we have here at the high school. Next year, our goal is to get more employers that are looking for also internships. So that way we can get kids meeting with these employers one-on-one, and we'll have the paperwork with us. We can set it up so they can fill out all their application information at that time. And that way, third trimester, they can go out and actually work with these employers before they even graduate. And that way, it's not, all right, I'm meeting with you in January or February, and now I've got to wait 4 months until I can actually go work full-time for you. I can get out of the building, go get my work experience, continue to learn those skills that I need to be successful, and then transition straight into it. So I think that's one of the directions we want to go with the event. We also want to continue to grow it and incorporate more seniors that don't have postgraduate plans. So I think that's pretty much it.
It's a lot, but
Thank you.
And obviously a very very important program, and we're grateful to you for bringing it to our attention. Does anyone from the committee have any questions or comments on the presentation? Mr. Larson?
You know, the more I've heard about it, I think it's just a fantastic opportunity to, again, you know, try to make sure that we're reaching all the kids. I mean, we keep saying it, but I mean, you guys are doing it, and that's fantastic. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Sheehan?
Andy mentioned that in his statement that it was a good sign. I'll tell you what is another good sign. In July that I met with Christine LaChance and Andy Cerrone, and it was early in my tenure here, and we talked about school to career and the opportunities and what a viable program this was and how underutilized it probably was as well. What's really a good sign is the 4 people that are sitting there. As we have Julie Little, even before that time, Julie had just become the Director of Guidance. And we're trying to, as you all know, create a viable guidance department. And Julie's done a great job, worked very, very hard, as evidenced by reaching out and being here together. Combine that with the Director of Special Education, and adds another dimension of the togetherness and how we're putting pieces of great programs together, and then add the 5th dimension of Joan DeAngelis, in which Andy and Christine met last week with regard to the Director of Student Services, and to be able to reach out and let people know, and parents and students and so forth, that these programs do exist, who to contact, and parents, by which we can provide different services to students and to the community. So it's really a good statement that it was a good sign, and I want you to continue to work together for the benefit of our kids.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Gills?
I just want, you mentioned opportunities for perhaps internships. I'm also thinking about the 18-plus program and maybe doing some opportunities for job shadowing for them. I thought that would be a good chance for them.
Absolutely.
Actually, that's one of the things next on our plate, right, Julie?
You got it.
Job
Absolutely.
shadows.
That's right.
Formalizing a job shadow program here. We've done it in different levels over the years, but really formalizing a job shadow program where all students could have the opportunity for that, so, yeah.
And if I may, and connecting even more programs, as I whispered to Max, if I was ever going to do a student survey, as we all know now, I'm just going to give you a resource. This young man heads an organization by which if you want student surveys done, I would go to his organization because they will get it done and they will get responses.
I actually mentioned you when we were talking about surveys. Still so excited.
But really, if you want to get anything else done, he's usually the guy.
So the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, and that's a good resource.
This is just one of a series of events. We're really trying to target all of the excellent things that are happening at the high school for transitions and making sure they're inclusive for all students. So this is one of the events that I'm hoping to bring to you throughout the year, so you'll be able to hear about how we're making all of the things that we do at the high school fully inclusive. And so some of the things in the future we have are, Julie and I have started talking about the regional college fair and making that a true inclusive college fair. So colleges are there with their support services, so students that have additional needs will be able to get that at our college fair as well. In the spring, we have a transition expo being held on a weekend, so that parents will be able to come and help transition to their students that need more supports after leaving high school. And so we're really just looking on building on the things that are already working here at the high school and truly making them it a full inclusive experience.
And I think one of the commitments that this committee has made and will continue to make is to make sure that we give you the platforms so that more people in the community know about some of the progress that's being made and some of the programs that are being developed, because that's one of our responsibilities, is that as these things happen and as they come into existence, we want to make sure that the community knows that the Attleboro High School and the Attleboro schools are a place where they can get these types of services. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, we sent around a copy from the Sun Chronicle when they'd been there of one of the pictures that they took. We weren't sure about the legality of providing pictures that
Well, we don't need to
our
go
staff.
into it right now.
So that, if you guys want to take a look at it.
Thank you very much. We
You're
will.
welcome.
We'll take a look at that. And anytime we can read a story by the Reporter of the Year, we obviously want to take a look at that. So
Absolutely.
thank you very much. Moving on, our next item on the agenda is a determination of when school is going to start, and for next year. It's an indication as to how quickly this year is going, I suppose. Oftentimes, as the committee knows, discussions with regard to the calendar are brought up in the context of the negotiations. In this instance, the negotiations will be starting imminently, but as we have a community full of people looking to finalize their schedule for the next 7 or 8 months, we thought it was important to make that determination. I'll turn it over to the superintendent in a minute to talk about the recommendation. The documentation provided to the committee does discuss the next 3 school years. I think that for purposes of tonight's discussion, we'll be talking just about the first day of school for the 2014-2015 school year. And those other calendar discussions will again come later in the context of our negotiations. So, Mr. Sheehan, do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
the rationale behind the recommendation
Well,
of the first day of school?
Obviously, that we have to have a calendar for next year, and usually you do calendars in 2 or 3 year blocks. But in order to make sense of 1 year versus another year, I think that the calendar itself, in fact, dictates a lot of the terms. And that's why I gave you three specific years. These are not etched in concrete, but I have rationale behind all of them, which would be my recommendation as we go forward. And some of this, in fact, may be viewed as negotiable. But for the 2014 school year, in fact, we do have Labor Day, which is the Circle one on September 1st. And we're looking to do convocation and teacher orientation day on the Tuesday, September 2nd, followed by the students going to school on the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Labor Day is a little earlier. However, we think because of it's so late in the year and having to do this, this falls with more of the tradition about where Attleboro has been, and I've looked back in some of the old news clips and so forth regarding this debate over the last few years. So I believe that would be the one that I would recommend for the committee to adopt going into next year, and for people to be able to start planning. So that's the first piece. The second piece, may I?
Sure.
The second piece, when you look in the 14, as I said, the actual calendar may dictate things to us. The actual calendar in the next year, in fact, goes to Labor Day on 2015 as September 7th. If you do that, you lose a lot of days early in the school year. So I would recommend at that particular time that the teacher orientation day that year be on the Monday, the August 31st, followed by the 4 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, as the first student days, which in fact would be before Labor Day, but would be in September. If you look at following suit on 2016, it follows the exact same path, is that the teacher orientation day or convocation would be on Monday, the 29th of August, but the students would go to school on Tuesday and Wednesday, the 30th and 31st of August, and followed by Thursday and Friday, September 1st and 2nd. Labor Day is the following Monday on the 5th. Again, they would be going to school 4 days prior to Labor Day. It just gives you some thought, gives you something to think about, because the calendar dictates some things in that manner.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. And I think I appreciate the administration providing that sort of forecast. I think it's important. It'll be an important part of conversations that will happen in the relatively near future. Again, for right now, and I think as the superintendent sort of alluded to, like the issue before us right now is a pragmatic one. It's not about the psychological traditional hurdle of September 1st or Labor Day or anything like that. This is just an issue of we have families who need to know, and staff for that matter, who need to know when school is going to start. And so are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to make with regard to Mr. Sheehan's comments or recommendation? Ms. Sawyer?
Well, we have to keep in mind that traditionally camps, like summer camps, like YMCA, they run camps up until the end of August.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to keep in mind that we can't, we can't predict what, I looked at, the YMCA does have their camps listed for 2014. They don't have that for 15 and 16, but I know that my daughter, wanted to go to the Girl Scout camp, but that didn't start till later, so then she had to go to, she actually went to 3 different camps last year because one ended early and then one started late. So, I mean, we can't dictate what camp schedules run either, and then some families don't have the families to help them with the children, so,
The support.
yeah, the support, so we have to keep that in mind too.
Sure. No, I think that's an important point. I think these are the types of things that the committee will have to keep in mind going forward.
But conversely, Mr. Chair, conversely, we don't want YMCA's or people dictating educational calendars either. So consequently, what happens is the reverse happens. If we get hours out, they can play off of that. That doesn't interfere with their calendar because they can start earlier in the summer than because they're going to end earlier. So I don't think they lose anything in the process. What I think what Diane's saying is accurate. We just need to let them know what ours is so they can plan accordingly as well.
I think it's a timeliness issue, which is why generally the school district tries to set these schedules
Right.
in advance. In this instance, we have both a new committee and an expiring contract, 2 variables that have resulted in, at the moment, we don't have a start date for this September, but we certainly will, I think, in a matter of minutes. Mr. Withers?
Yeah, I mean, just coming back to 2014, because that's what we're voting on now, right?
Yes.
It's my understanding, at least I believe it is, that right now and in the past few years, there's been 2 professional days, right, before the kids come in?
There's been 1 professional development day. However, the administration, and I don't want to speak for the AEA, but my understanding is that there's been support throughout the district for the possibility of having 2 professional development days. But
Okay.
as of right now, the precedent has been for 1.
So it's not changing anything?
That's correct.
Okay.
This would follow along with recent history. Mr. Storrs?
And that was the other issue I wanted to bring up. I know we've talked about it in the past, the fact that there's some concern out there from parents on the length of the December vacation. Taking the 2 full-day professional days and making part of the December vacation, something we did a couple of years ago, was probably better than having them arbitrary Wednesdays. But now, if that's something that we could look at as well, I understand for 2014, maybe it's not possible, but for maybe it is.
It in fact is possible.
Very good, okay.
Because once this gets settled, then we look at what are the PD days. I certainly don't want to extend Christmas vacation from the 19th and 20th as we did this year. I don't believe that's conducive to anybody. However, we want to put them judiciously in the calendar, which may have less of an impact with regard to the teaching and learning of kids, and provide the necessary professional development for our staff and administration. So,
And I would just say, the professional development days is an important calendar issue, and one that will be part of subsequent
Yes.
discussions. But I think the points that, I think people are very familiar with the sentiment that perhaps our education has become fairly lengthy for a school district. So that will certainly be one that is taken up in the near future. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we'll have a motion to approve the scheduling of the first day of school for the Attleboro schools as recommended by the administration for the 2014-2015 school year, with staff reporting on Tuesday, September 2nd, 2014, and students reporting on Wednesday, September 3rd, 2014.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so if you're a student in the Attleboro schools, you can begin the countdown. Your first day of school is September 3rd. Moving on to our next scheduling item is the school committee meeting schedule, which, as members and staff who attend school committee meetings know, has been somewhat flummoxed over the course of the past month for a variety of reasons. Lengthy orientation program being one of them, a new committee, some snow dates. The schedule that was included in the school committee's packet on Saturday, did include a proposal, and I just wanted to make one note of this. The previous school committee amended a policy which at the time required a minimum of 2 meetings per month. That change was to change the minimal number of monthly meetings to 1 per month, and at the moment, it is not under consideration to change that policy. But I think a little bit of a misperception took hold that the school committee was saying we will not convene more than once a month. That was never the intention of that policy change. It's not required. And as you can see with the proposed schedule, what we're trying to achieve is a schedule that is dictated by the work that needs to be done, as opposed to work being dictated by a schedule we've tied ourselves to. So, as I said in my correspondence to the committee, it is impossible to predict with 100% accuracy when the committee will meet, but it's also important for both members and for staff to be able to put into their calendars what the schedule is expected to be. So under this, it would be one more meeting in February in which we'll conduct the regular business that we're moving off of the schedule for tonight so that we can engage in the discussions we need to later in executive session. 2 meetings in March. There is only 1 meeting scheduled in April. That's largely because of the April vacation. 2 meetings in May as we go into sort of the thrust of budget season. 2 meetings in June, one of which is an additional meeting to wrap up some of the work. And then the policy does not require, traditionally the committee does not convene in July, and this would adhere to that as well. So does anyone have any questions or comments with regard to this? The subcommittee meeting is scheduled, the subcommittee schedule is attached as well. There's fewer changes to that, although some dates were adjusted to try to keep the tradition of the subcommittee meetings preceding the school committee meetings. Any questions? Okay, so we'll have a motion to approve the revised schedule of school committee meetings and school committee subcommittee meetings from February 2014 until August of 2014.
So moved.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I just
Mr.
want
Storrs?
to, although some of these dates are difficult for me, and I've made you aware that if it's what's best for the committee, then I'm not acceptable to that.
I appreciate that, and obviously, to the degree that there are scheduling conflicts, I would just encourage committee members to make me aware of them, and if there's any, if and when there are accommodations to be made, we certainly will try to do that. It will not be the case in every instance, as everyone knows, I think, but thank you for that, Mr. Storrs. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so we will publish the new school committee schedule and subcommittee schedule in the coming days. For our next 2 items, Mr. Rose, could you join the committee? Okay, at our previous meeting on January 23rd, Mr. Rose and Mr. Parento briefed the committee on the MSBA application process that was underway with regard to the window repair project and the HVAC repair system. There is a special meeting of the City Council that is convening tomorrow night. The City Council is prepared to vote to send to the mayor's desk for his signature and ultimate submission to the MSBA the application and the statement of interest. Before the council takes that vote, a vote is required by the City Council. This is an issue that the previous committee was briefed on, that we were briefed on January 23rd, and the documentation was included in the school committee packet. So before I turn it over to Mr. Rose, does anyone have any questions or comments with any of the information that's been provided regarding this application process? Mr. Rose, do you have any extremely important and brief comments to add with regard to this application?
Very, very brief. Bottom line, there are really three documents that get plugged into the application. One is the actual application itself. Two is a letter indicating that the minutes from the school committee meeting saying yes, the school department's behind it. And three, similar letter but coming from the city council. That way the MSBA knows that everyone is on board with this application. And so that's the purpose of your requested action tonight. Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Withers?
What's the timeline as far as hearing back from them, assuming everyone votes to send it along?
Mr. Withers, I don't know. I'm hopeful that we will hear by the end of June. But to be very honest with you, it's not like we received a no letter. At any time last fiscal year, we kept waiting and waiting and waiting.
Okay.
So I'm hopeful that we'll hear by the end of June, but there's no guarantee.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from Mr. Rose? Okay, so I have a motion to approve the resubmission of the MSBA application of the HVAC and windows replacement as outlined in the enclosures presented in supporting documentation for tonight's school committee meeting.
So moved.
Second?
All in discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And Mr. Rose, if you could communicate to our municipal partners that that's been approved by the
Great.
school committee. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Okay, moving on to the transportation update, which, as the committee knows, is a slightly more complicated issue than our MSBA application. So, Mr. Rose, if you could, there are 3 votes expected tonight. The normal vote that we take with regard to our monthly transportation update,
Yes.
stating the deficit, an endorsement of the process being recommended by the school and city administrations with regard to a strategy to respond to that deficit, and a vote to approve the amendment to the transportation services contract with H&L Bloom, which it's a minor change to the contract, but essentially it would allow the funds that are currently encumbered for use on a 29th bus, a bus which is not in service, to become unencumbered, and allow those funds to go toward funding the transportation deficit. The committee is aware of the memorandum sent from the city auditor to the municipal council, copying the school committee with regard to this issue. And Mr. Rose, if you could just articulate for the committee where this deficit came from, and sort of why the actions are being recommended with regard to our response.
Yes, Mr. Chair. There are really 2 reasons for a projected deficit. The first reason is in regard to homeless transportation. And the second reason is in regard to out-of-district transportation. If you look at the transportation budget, there are really 3 threads. Thread number 1 are the salaries. Thread number 2 are the contracts that we know about. And then thread number 3 is what I just mentioned, out-of-district transportation and homeless transportation. Regarding those first 2 items, we're doing very, very well as far as our spend lines on salaries. Certainly the contractor is doing a good job in regard to staying within the framework of the contract and properly invoicing. And from the business office standpoint, actually we're doing a good job making sure that the invoices are legit and that we're only paying the correct bills. But the third area can be a little unwieldy, and that is in regard to homeless transportation, out-of-district transportation. Let's split it out. Regarding out-of-district transportation, because that's really the easier one to address, the primary item on the out-of-district transportation, very simply, is that the new transportation contract that we are a part of, we being the Attleboro School Department, part of the Bi-County Collaborative, the new transportation contract has gone up for FY14 as compared to FY13. Specifically, the contractors and the vendors that we use, and it's a consortium, and the primary one is YCN, but they're not the only vendor. They're not the only transportation company. But they went in and they put together a proposal which we are a part of. Now, we're not a huge player in this because thanks to our transportation office, we have 6 vehicles that we use to transport out-of-district students every single day. But those 6 vehicles can't transport everybody. And that's when we have to call YCN, specifically, that's when we have to call Bi-County Collaborative and ask for help. And a small example of the change in the contract is this. In the past, it might cost between $35 to $37 for one student. Now, the vendor says, if you want me to go from point A to point B, that cost is going to be $196. Now, if you have 3 other students that can hop on that same vehicle, great. We'll split the cost by 4. But if not, guess who has to pick up the $196? It's you. I, being the vendor, I'm not going to take a loss if I only have 1 student as compared to 4 students. So what the vendor will try to do is they'll try to put as many students on that vehicle as possible, but the costs are going up as a result of the way the contract is structured. What is not an issue with out-of-district transportation is a rising number of students. That's not the case. It's the contract structure that we're a part of, and frankly, we have to continue to work with this vendor, Bi-County Collaborative, or with this consortium, because believe it or not, if we're to try to go out on our own, to try to get our own vehicles and try to get our own phone calls, there's no question the cost would be higher. Here it is, now at least combined demand with other school districts, and we've negotiated the very, very best possible contract that we could. That's in regard to out-of-district transportation. The last threat is homeless transportation. FY12, $124,000 of expenses. FY13, $113,000 of expenses. The report that I submitted to you, which I'm asking for your approval on, the projection's $215,000. It may happen, it's on the high side, but at this point, what we don't want to do is to lowball and then come back in May or June and say, you know what, I think we're going to need a little bit more money. Homeless transportation is an unwieldy area. And what I don't want to do is convey the message that we can't possibly make projections, because we can't. That's why we're here tonight, making projections. But what I can, but what I do need to tell you is that there's no way to determine how many students might be coming in that door tomorrow, and how many students may leave that door or leave the school system within the next X number of weeks. But it's a growing area, it's a growing expense, and that's really the bear in the woods. That's really the big task that we've got to try to get our hands around. With this transportation report, I feel very confident that we've got our arms around it with this projection of $170,000 deficit, which includes approximately $215,000 on homeless transportation. Let me stop talking and pass everything back to the committee.
Mr. Sheehan, do you want to add a comment?
Just a quick question. I now serve on the executive board for the Bi-County Collaborative. And you're saying to me that the Bi-County Collaborative increased transportation costs for out-of-district students. When did we know that they were increasing their cost for out-of-district students in 2004, for the 2014 school year?
Let me back up. It's not really Bi-County Collaborative as it is the contract that was awarded through Bi-County.
Okay.
And the answer was in the fall.
In the fall, this fall. But as a member of the board, that had never come to us as a member of the board, that a transportation cost would be provided in a fall of a year that school departments' budgets were already put forth and voted on.
Agreed.
How do you control that?
Well, and the answer is, it's hard.
Well, the answer will be, Tom, when I go to my meeting on Thursday, the answer will be, this is unacceptable.
Correct.
We have budgets that we have to stick to, and they can't arbitrarily, through a transportation vendor, say, okay, in the fall, after your budget was passed 6 months earlier, we're going to increase transportation. That's not happening.
And I think that Mr. Rose, you've done a good job of identifying the source of the deficit and where we stand with regard to the deficit. In a moment, I want you to walk the committee down the road of the strategy being advocated for responding to the deficit, but I know Mr. Larson has a question first.
Sure.
It's not really more of a comment, because I just, going back to the conversations we had last spring, putting the transportation budget together, I mean, as you laid out for us back then, the contract with Bloom, it is what it is. It's a fixed number. The plus part that we run here, we know that's a fixed number. The other two pieces of it, I can remember having the conversations last spring, and there is no, they're projections that you put into the budget, because, as you just said, you have no idea how many people are going to show up tomorrow or leave tomorrow from a homeless situation. I mean, you hope that they all can find a better place to be and the right place for them to be, and whatever the answer to that is. But in the meantime, it comes and goes, and you do your best. I mean, I remember we looked back over the last few years as it had been running, and we came up with what we thought was our best estimate.
Correct.
You know, having somebody change pricing after you've set your budget, as far as the BICO collaborative, you know, there's no way you can foresee somebody increasing your prices 3 months after you've passed your budget. So I don't want people to get the misconception that something's going wrong. I mean, there is something going wrong, but it's far beyond anyone's control around this table. So I guess I really just want to emphasize that you know, because people they start having, you know, as soon as they hear transportation deficit, they start, you know, having nightmares and, you know, relapses and the rest of it, and it's not fair.
You don't want anyone relapsing over this.
Relapse, whatever. So I mean,
It's
but
stressful,
I think the appropriate response is, you know, what's going on is beyond the scope of the people in the building, you know, those of us around the table, and, you know, the best judgment that we could make last spring when we put the budget together, so.
Correct. I agree with Mr. Harris.
Any other questions or comments with regard to the existence of the deficit? Mr. Tyler? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Tom, I think we all know that the homeless busting was a federal mandate, no child left behind. But the state auditor, Susan Bump, did find it as an unfunded mandate. So what percentage is the federal government picking up on homeless busing since the state of Massachusetts declared this an unfunded mandate?
So far for fiscal year 14, that's an unknown, Mr. Tyler. Specifically,
How about in the past? What have they done in the past?
it has varied. It specifically in FY, from the FY 12, $124,000. The city came back and reimbursed us dollar for dollar, but they didn't get reimbursed dollar for dollar. It was probably somewhere around 85%, and that was that was based on the $124,000 from FY 12 that they got reimbursed for in FY 13. As far as FY 14's dollars, based on the $113,000 of expenses from FY 13, it's an unknown. Bottom line, nothing has come forward yet from the state for reimbursement to the city for the $113,000 of homeless transportation expenses that were incurred by the school department / city in FY 13. So the answer is, so far, zero.
And I think even the year before, with regard to Mr. Tyler's question, the federal reimbursement was zero, that there wasn't a reimbursement, but with regard to the federal government, which mandated it, that is still an unfunded mandate,
I
correct?
apologize. The answer is yes, Mr. Chair. That the reimbursement that I referred to, that was from the state. That was not from the federal government. Specifically, that reimbursement of on the 124 from FY12, where I believe the city ended up with somewhere in the area of around 100 to 110,000, but we got reimbursed dollar for dollar from the city. That was from the state. That was not from the federal government.
Okay, because I'm just trying to touch on what Mr. Lawson said, and obviously these are expenditures that we keep occurring them year after year. It's very aggravating. But on touching what Bill is, we have no control over it, and even though it was found as an unfunded mandate, it doesn't even seem like we're getting anything back after that. It was like 1 year they gave money, and then all of a sudden that has stopped. So this is a very aggravating situation that they put this committee in, especially with the city of Attleboro funding transportation. It's really put us at lockheads of the city council and the mayor's office over this. It seems like just every year
It's very aggravating, Tom, and I know you do a great job. It's extremely aggravating from this side of the table to hear this speech every year. And it's gotta end sometime, really. It's very aggravating.
Mr. Sheehan?
Last week, there was a very, very important meeting with regard to transportation in my office with Mr. Rose present, Mr. Sawyer, Mayor Dumas, Deb Gould, and Brian LaChance. And the bottom line was that although these things are beyond some of our controls, we do know one thing, that the McKinney-Vento price tag is not going down. Therefore, the things that we can control is our budget request. So, at their urgence, they actually said, we need to provide the appropriate increase in that budget for McKinney-Vento, with the anticipation of looking back and saying, okay, what do we estimate that percentage to potentially be, and not keep it level funded, because we have known over the last few years, and it is going to increase, because it's not going away. And other communities throughout all of New England, in fact, are saddled with this, and it's something that is a budget buster right now in a lot of communities. But we need to budget accordingly. At their urgence, we need to budget accordingly.
And I think it just speaks to the importance of the partnership between the school district and CNS.
Yes.
Ms. Singer?
I'm sorry, that just kind of went to one of the questions I had in terms of when you're figuring out, because it is an unknown and it does go up and down, when you forecast your budget, is there a formula you use to say, we think that this will increase by 10%? Or do you have, or is it just kind of, it's level funded all the time?
Two threads. Thread number one, as far as what are we doing right now as far as fiscal year 14, and how can you be sure that $170,000 is going to be enough? What we do, we being myself and Mr. Sheehan and Mr. Sawyer, we work closely with the office, specifically with Joan DeAngelis and with Colleen Jeffrey. And they work very, very hard, and not only with all the registrations, but also in regard to gathering all the invoices, trying to put through the purchase orders, and trying to estimate. In fact, just a few hours ago, I got an estimate as to what they think, or what Colleen thinks is going to be the figure that we're going to be using for all of fiscal year 14. And so that, now that we've got that report's going to continually be updated on a regular basis. So the first answer to your question, we can look at the existing individuals, look at the existing profile, and then let's make the assumption every one of these individuals is going to stay on board, and if they do, what's going to be that cost? And so that's the thread we go toward as far as managing and coming up with a good projection for this fiscal year. For next fiscal year, we have right now for FY14 a projection of $215,000. For next fiscal year, when that budget gets developed, we'll probably in about another month, in all likely we'll probably build in at least a 20% increase on top of the $215,000.
Excellent question. Thank you. Mrs. Storrs?
I'm trying to remember, when it comes to the budget,
Yes.
When we get level funded,
Yes.
that excludes transportation, is that correct?
Let me try to answer your question, but if I don't answer it, I want you to tell me.
Sure.
I think the point that you're making is our budget is broken between transportation and non-transportation. And the non-transportation are what the net school spending,
Right.
the eligible expenses.
That's what I was
And
getting
so the answer to your question, Mr. Storrs, is absolutely positively yes. And Deb and the folks at City Hall do a wonderful job making sure that those two paths don't merge. Because we cannot use non-net school spending dollars, transportation dollars, in support of net school spending dollars and vice versa. So yes, the budget does get supported.
And at the same time, just because our transportation needs go up, it doesn't mean that our net school spending is going down.
Correct. The answer is the two have completely nothing to do with one another. The one thing that they have everything to do with is the city's got to come up with the money. But there is absolutely no relationship at all between net school spending and transportation.
Thank you.
Mr. Withers?
Yeah, I guess, I would just say, I think everyone around the table and in the audience think it's a frustrating situation. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But like Mr. Larson said, it's frustrating because of the law and what's going on in the economy, not because of anything that we're doing. And I think, we don't really have a choice in the matter. And the one thing I would say that, there's some, maybe optimism to be gleaned from this is we've all talked about how we need to work closer with the city earlier on in the process so that they know what our needs are and explain, why we need them. And if that's being done now and that's a result of, this, that's getting put on our lap right now, then, that's a benefit to be gleaned from it, so.
It's
it is
certainly
what it is.
better to deal with it in the middle of February than in the first week of June.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of us have said, is we don't want to, be presenting our budget to the city in 3 months and have them, have no idea what and why we want, so, perhaps something good can come out of it.
And I know that the communication between our administration and the city government is going to continue, as I think Mr. Sheehan's alluded to earlier, that there are additional meetings scheduled and these discussions will continue. So with that, Mr. Rose, if you could perhaps transition to a summary of the strategies going forward with regard to, in fact, I'm sorry, before we do that though, why don't we, because I think we have sufficiently covered the topic at hand with regard to the existence of the
Yes.
deficit.
Yes.
I'd like to entertain a motion with regard to the approval of the report issued by the school department on a periodic basis, identifying the existence of that. And I know that does, you have asked for a vote on that, so.
Yes, I have.
And because Mr. Larson sits next to me, I've passed the note on to him to mix up who's offering the motion. So, Mr. Larson?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the latest financial status update, which shows that the Attleboro School District may have a deficit of $170,000 by June 30th, 2014, unless additional transportation funds are made available.
Second.
Okay, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And that, so the transportation update is now approved. And Mr. Rose, if you could now transition into the strategy being advocated by both the school and city administration with regard to responding to this deficit.
Yes. Step number one is let's take a close look at all of our invoices that we have in regard to out-of-district transportation and the homeless transportation, because keep in mind, the other two items are really in good, by this stage of the game, we have data through the end of January. And granted, the bulk of the transportation data really doesn't start to come in until September, but we've got a solid 5 months worth of data. And the bottom line is, from a standpoint of our salary lines and the Bloom contract line, we're in good shape there. So it really comes down to two items, and I know I'm probably repeating myself. One's in regard to out-of-district transportation, the other's in regard to homeless transportation. In regard to out-of-district transportation, took a look. The number of students is pretty much identical, 25 students. Specifically, we have vendors that transport 25 of our students to schools outside of Attleboro that we can't transport to. And that excludes, naturally, the students that we do transport with our 6 vehicles. Look at the spend rate that we had coming in so far this fiscal year. Over the first 3 to 4 months, that spend rate is $25,000. I take that spend rate, project it out. I believe that's a good spend rate, and plugged it in and then added in a little bit of cushion. In regard to homeless transportation, it's a similar situation. The only difference is, with homeless, the spend rate is approximately $20,000 to $22,000. Once again, the same item, take it, project it out, and build in a little bit of a cushion. And here's a small example. At our meeting last Tuesday, we were with the mayor, and the mayor, and we were letting everyone know about the latest and greatest bills. And the mayor said, let's not go back a second time. Let's make sure that we plug in a deficit, so let's add in a couple extra $1,000 because we can't be certain. And he's right, because we don't have all our January bills yet. And so it was a similar path that was followed. And so the bottom line is the projection for homeless transportation is a total of $215,000. And the projection for out-of-district transportation is approximately $195,000. Those numbers combined with our other existing bills plus our budget shows a deficit of about $170,000.
And the strategy to plug that deficit, there are two sources as the committee's been briefed, the Medicaid reimbursement and the unencumbrance of the 29th bus funds. So is there anything to add with regard to the strategy being advocated to fund the deficit?
The answer is no, Mr. Chair. Thank you. The 29th bus, we don't need. Matt Bloom is aware of it. We only needed, the 28th bus only came on board in December. And as far as the Medicaid funds are concerned, The city is expecting approximately $130,000 of Medicaid dollars, and right now the plan is to provide all that $130,000 to us to help pay our transportation bill. And those are the two main threads in regard to the way this deficit's going to get funded.
Okay, and if, just to be clear, the Medicaid reimbursement
Yes.
funds are funds that are returned to the city of Attleboro, and outside of any agreements between the city and the school district, there is no obligation on the part of the municipality to return those funds to the school district, no obligation. However, there was an expectation that somewhere in the vicinity of $70,000 or $75,000 would be returned. Okay, that is my understanding. Now, in this instance, obviously the funds coming back exceed the $70,000 or $75,000, but obviously there needs to be a plan in place to ensure that what would have been paid for with the $70,000 or $75,000 that was expected to come back, that those issues are going to be taken care of. And it's my understanding that at this point in the fiscal year, in identifying some savings throughout the course of the budget, we have no reason to think that using the Medicaid funds to resolve this transportation deficit will in any way have a detrimental impact on the district as a whole or any areas that would have received that funding. Is that statement accurate, Mr. Rose?
The answer is yes. When we build our budget for FY15 and when we built it for FY14, it's not built based on anticipated receipt of Medicaid funds from the city on 50 cents on the dollar. The dollars that come in are great, we love them, but it's not built based on anticipated Medicaid funds.
Okay.
So we're set.
And Mr. Sheehan, if you have any comments to add, or if perhaps you could just touch upon the assurance that there will be no detrimental impact with the position being advocated.
Usually we get back 50% of the Medicaid money, but the public should understand that we generate
Right.
that money from Medicaid. The town has the opportunity to give it all back to us, but they've only been giving us back 50% for years and years and years. At this juncture, because transportation is their responsibility, they're giving it all back. Plus their urgence of going back to Bloom with the contract piece, which was going to give us another $28,000, $27,000, because of the 29th bus that we know we're not going to have to use this year. You know, that gives us a large chunk of the $170,000 projected. To answer your question directly, I don't believe that there will be any negative impact by utilizing the Medicaid money for the transportation piece than what we ordinarily would have used it for.
Okay. And obviously, that's something that we just have to keep the committee informed as if any issues do come up with
Correct.
that. Obviously, we need to know immediately. Does anyone have any questions or comments, Mr. Tyler?
Yeah, a quick question. Tom, I think you did a great job with Jim asking the question about the net school spending and transportation being two entirely different entities. But in some cases, that statement can be a little iffy, wrong, if you will. I think I need some type of reliance that it seems like when we're trying to rework this contract, we've had problems in the last couple of years about our after-school busing. These are for kids to stay to school, after-school help, prep work for MCAS and stuff like that. I think I would need some type of reassurance that since we're taking money out of our traditional transportation and spending it now on homeless and out of district, that it's not going to affect the programs that we have in place in the transportation that we need to provide for these programs.
Sure. And the answer, Mr. Tyler, is it is not going to affect the after-school programs that we have that are provided for our kids for one reason. Those dollars are already set aside. They're already in a purchase order for Bloom Transportation. After the meeting, if we're to go to the office and we're to pull the purchase order for Bloom Transportation, it's a large purchase order. And it's not just a purchase order that includes 29 buses. It's not just a purchase order that includes 29 buses and 10 minivans. It's a purchase order that includes the buses, the minivans, and after-school care. We are not touching that purchase order in any way taking money from anyone to fund homeless transportation. What we're doing with this amendment is we're taking a contract that shows 29 buses, and we're saying, but we're only gonna need 28. So rather than month after month after month putting in a de-obligation, let's just do it all up front. And that's what we're gonna do. And in doing that, we're gonna free up about $30,000 now, instead of freeing up $30,000 between now through the end of June. But the answer to your question, the dollars that are set aside for after-school programs, those dollars for transportation, they're already in the purchase order, they're not gonna be touched, and I am very, very happy to say that particular program is running so much better this fiscal year than last fiscal year, and the reason, coordination among the 3 middle school principals and the transportation office. But it's not gonna be a rob from Peter to pay Paul, I promise you that.
Mr. Withers?
Thank you, Tom.
Regarding regarding the Bloom contract
Yes.
amendment, I guess it's a multi-part question.
Yes.
Have they been approached about, with the proposed amendment, and are they agreeable to it?
Yes.
And specifically, are they agreeable with the form that's been floated around, or just in principle?
The answer is both,
Okay,
not an issue.
all right.
And I know I'm repeating myself, Bloom only used 27 buses September, October, November. Beginning December 2nd, they used the 28th bus, and they're gonna continue to, because we don't anticipate that we're gonna be able to cut back from 28 to 27. But under no circumstance at any point right now, nor do I anticipate, there's gonna be a requirement to add on a 29th bus. So to be very honest with you, it's really kind of a painless situation for Bloom. Really, it's a matter of just de-obligating the money up front now in February as compared to waiting through a 5-month period to de-obligate the dollars incrementally.
So the contingency of them saying no and us having to come up with $30,000 really is not a contingency at all?
It's not a contingency at all because there are no plans to add a 29th bus.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Storrs and then Mr. Sheehan, and if I know, Tom, if you have to preface it with "I've already said this,"
All right, okay.
we'll watch the tape if that's the case. Mr. Storrs.
It's for Mr. Sheehan, really. You had mentioned normally the 65, 75,000, whatever it would have been, 50%, would have come back to the school district, and where would you have proposed that money would have been spent if it had been available?
I'd have to look at where the programs are. Predominantly where it's usually received from, and from the special education department, I would look at earmarking it back toward the special education department.
So the loss really to us based on this unforeseen is that right there. That
Right,
not
and
gonna
we're
be able to
comfortable,
utilize
as
those
we've
funds.
sat in meetings with Dr. McCarthy.
Yeah.
Got that in, Doctor? That we, in fact, have discussed that as well, and we're in pretty good shape in that department right now, and she does a great job keeping us apprised in that.
Great.
I might add, and I know in the essence of time, Mr. Tyler, you brought up something very, very, very important and near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to say it now publicly, where we're going to be saying it and discussing it in the next few months anyways, and that is about the after-school busing. This is criminal that we have 2 days a week for our elementary school kids and our middle school kids, who, by the way, don't drive. So they're not like high school kids who have friends who may drive, that they stay after school and so forth. They're dependent upon us. After-school busing for our kids, either you have it or you don't have it, or it's minimal, deprives kids of opportunity that we should be offering kids. And in this city, to have 2 buses for our middle school, when we want to offer other programs such as robotics and such as remedial services and extra help and other entities that we want to create well-rounded kids, and we only have 2 buses a week for middle school and elementary school kids, we have to find a better way to do this. And so, I'm going to be promoting that as we look at the budget, and I will be talking to the mayor and city council regarding providing those extra buses and money for that.
And a very important point, as Mr. Sheehan said, one that this committee will be looking at. If you've seen all of the objectives that we set for ourselves, well-roundedness is one of the terms that comes up over and over and over again. And until we have the after-school programming that the students in the community deserve, that's just going to be rhetoric. And so I appreciate the superintendent identifying it as a priority of the administration.
And Mr. Chair, it's that, and it goes beyond that. We're sending kids home to families at work and to latchkey kids and unsupervised and so forth. It plays a role in the entire culture of this community.
Yep, and what I would say is that these are some of, I think, the big picture and underlying issues that are extremely important for any conversation about transportation and frankly for the school system. I want to move on in the very near future to the actual vote about what we're doing for this particular deficit, but I know Mrs. Scales has been waiting patiently, so thank you, Mrs. Scales.
In regards to the Medicaid funding, I do believe a portion of that, the 70,000, was built into the special education budget. Will that be impacted? How will the children be impacted? How will programs be impacted? And how will you cover those expenses?
But Mr. Rose, before I want you to respond to Ms. Scales' question, but if Dr. McCarthy wants to supplement that response, you should feel welcome to do so. But Mr. Rose, after we hear what Mr. Rose says, then you can decide if you want to supplement his response.
The answer to your question, Mrs. Scales, is that the FY 14 budget for special education is funded with a couple of different sources. One source of money clearly is the regular budget. Another source of money is circuit breaker, which we also receive. And then another source is Medicaid funds. And there have been some Medicaid funds that we've already received. Among those three sources of funds, Medicaid, that we've already received, as well as circuit breaker, which we're receiving and continuing to receive, along with the regular budget, there will be sufficient funds to manage the special ed program. No programs will be cut, and no services will be in any way changed or eliminated for our students.
Dr. McCarthy, anything to add?
No, the Medicaid funding, when it's built into the budget, it's to support one staff position, tuitions and supplies for Medicaid funding to get the reimbursement. So I'll work with Mr. Rose and we'll be able to find that funding elsewhere in the budget.
Thank you.
And we'll be fine.
If it wasn't for the additional degree, I may not put you on the spot, but I feel like now that you're Dr. McCarthy, if you're in the room, it's fair game. So I appreciate that, and I think Mrs. Scales' point is an important one, and as I communicated to the administration today, or in recent days, I believe, the committee's endorsement, assuming that there is an endorsement of this strategy, should be viewed as contingent on the assurances that have been made that this will not have a detrimental impact. I believe you've laid out a sound and rational basis for believing that it won't, but it would be unfair, I think, for the committee to not communicate to you that the reason that this is being considered is because of the assurance that the administration has made that we'll be able to minimize the impact. So, Mr. Withers?
Just a point of clarification, because I think a couple contrary things that have been said. Medicaid funding that's in the budget, is that what you received last year, or was it what you projected to receive this year? Because I thought you said earlier that what we're going to receive this year is not included as income in the budget.
That is correct.
Okay.
Our fiscal year 14 budget
Yep.
of approximately $65 million does not include any Medicaid funds at all.
Okay.
Just like it doesn't include any carryover funds. But offline, within Munis, we do receive dollars from carryover that we didn't spend as of June 30, and from time to time we'll receive dollars in the Medicaid area, period. And so the answer is the budget that we build, and that we are beginning to build right now, that budget will not include Medicaid funds for fiscal year 15, because we don't know what those funds are going to be. We'll be building the budget based on the existing funds that we have right now, which is approximately $65 million, and trying to determine what we think we're going to get for fiscal year 15, knowing that of that $65 million, about $3.1 million of that was tied for transportation this fiscal year. The next fiscal year, obviously, that $3.1 million is going to go up.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So I'm going to entertain a motion to approve the use of approximately $130,000 in Medicaid reimbursement funds to go toward balancing the aforementioned transportation deficit.
So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstentions? Okay, so in an 8-1 vote, that the committee has endorsed that strategy, and I just ask that the superintendent and Mr. Rose keep the committee informed as this progresses to the municipal government. Now, the other source of plugging this deficit, as was discussed in that discussion, is the amendment to the Bloom contract. And just to review one last time, we use 28 so-called big buses right now. The 29th bus is not in service. However, because it is part of the contract, the funds for that bus are encumbered. Now, I don't know, are the funds released monthly, quarterly? Is it monthly?
The answer is they're released on a monthly basis.
Okay.
As we receive the invoices.
Perfect. So, what if we were to not take this vote? Those funds would be released, but on a monthly basis because of the existence of this deficit. We've been asked to approve the amendment to this contract so that those funds can become unencumbered now, and we can respond to this deficit. So, a motion to approve the amendment to the transportation services contract with H&L Bloom to allow the funds currently encumbered for use for a 29th bus that is currently not in service to be unencumbered for the remainder of the fiscal year 2014.
So moved.
Any discussion?
I actually have one more question.
Yes.
Is this $170,000 deficit, give or take, is that due now? I mean, what's the benefit of having these funds available right away versus if they're going to be available monthly anyway to pay the amount? Why do we need to free them up presently?
For this reason.
Yeah.
The projection is a $170,000 deficit.
Yeah.
But we receive bills on a regular basis. We're running out of money.
Okay. Fair
And
enough.
If it was a situation, Mr. Withers, where we only had to obligate that which we needed to pay on a month-to-month basis, we could stretch it out, but that's not the case. In September, or in July, we need to obligate the full boat for all 29 buses. And frankly, it's getting tight.
Mr. Storrs.
Mr. Rose, you had indicated that the budget was built off of the contract, which indicated 29 buses.
Yes.
Now, each month, we get invoices in based on the use of 27 or now 28 buses.
Correct.
So we're not paying out the amount of money of 29 buses, which is what the budget was built on. So that should have left extra funding in that budget line because of the non-use of the 29th bus. Is that correct?
Not really.
Okay.
Let me explain, and if I confuse the issue, I apologize.
All right.
Our budget for fiscal year 14 is less than our budget from fiscal year 13. Why? Because in fiscal year 13, we used 29 buses. This fiscal year, I thought we could definitely go down by 1 and maybe even go down by 2. If I spoke to the folks in the transportation office and said, we can go down by 3. With that in mind, I built in a budget assuming that we're not going to need 29 buses. But when we get the purchase order started in July, understandably so, the city auditor wants us to adhere to the contract, and the contract calls for 29 buses, with the understanding being that month to month to month, we take our money back and we put in other parts of the budget that need it, transportation budget. So that's, the answer is the budget wasn't built based on the anticipated use of 29 buses. It was really based on the anticipated use of less than 29.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. The motion is to approve the amendment to the H&L Bloom contract. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And that motion is approved 9-0. And I believe that concludes our transportation update for tonight. So, thank you, Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I, as Mr. Rose packs up, I'll just add one last comment. You know, whenever we hear the word deficit, obviously, you know, that's problematic. And this is hardly an ideal situation. I think as the committee's comments reflect, it is attributable in this instance largely, the existence of the deficit is attributable to things that we don't have control over. And so while there are long-term systemic issues and big conversations that need to take place with regard to transportation, and they will, it's also important to keep in mind that there are variables that are outside of our control, but that is why what we can control, we have to obviously be as responsible as we can in being stewards of taxpayer dollars. So I don't want, you know, again, this is a It's a difficult issue. It's a difficult issue, frankly, for school districts across the Commonwealth and across the country, but it's one that we'll continue to try to respond to in as responsible a manner as possible. So thank you for the committee for a robust discussion and, at least for the moment, a resolution. And we'll obviously, as the superintendent said, continue to work closely with our partners in the municipal government to address these and other issues. Okay, so the committee is scheduled to adjourn tonight, slightly behind schedule, into an executive session. So a motion to enter into executive session to discuss strategy with regard to collective bargaining or litigation. The school committee will not be convening an open session subsequent to the executive session.
Second.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Withers? Yes. Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Mrs. Zito? With congratulations to whoever took the over tonight's meeting. The meeting is in executive session.